How many times have you poured out every last drop of your energy for someone who didn't even turn around to say thank you? Maybe you know that feeling all too well, the ache of giving absolutely everything you have, only to feel invisible in the end. Holly, a mother like so many others, spent 28 years putting her son's dreams ahead of her own. She set herself aside, carried the weight of the world on her shoulders, quietly stitching together a life with dignity piece by piece, day after day. But nothing, not even all those years of sacrifice, could have prepared her for what happened on the most anticipated day of all, Oliver's graduation. What should have been a celebration turned into a deep, searing wound, the kind that makes the soul bleed. Imagine looking into your own child's eyes and not being recognized. Not as a mother. Not as a woman. Not as anything at all. Now picture this in front of dozens of guests. Oliver points to another woman and introduces her as his mother. That's right. Holly was presented merely as a family friend. This is the moment where most people would crumble. But Holly? She chose a different path. She stood up. And what happened after wasn't just a scene, it was an emotional earthquake that exposed lies, tore open old wounds, and most importantly, began piecing back together shattered identities. This is a story about motherhood, about sacrifice, and about something even rarer, redemption. Because sometimes, to reclaim what is yours, you first have to lose it. You're about to witness unexpected twists, confrontations that will stir your heart, and revelations that might even make you look differently at your own story. And if you think you already know how this ends, get ready to be surprised. Because what he said next broke Holly's heart. But it also revealed everything she needed to hear. And maybe, just maybe, everything you need to hear too. Holly took a deep breath in front of the mirror. The navy blue dress she had kept for years, bought in small installments, was finally going to be worn. At 65, her body carried the scars of time, but her eyes shone like those of a young woman about to live out a long-held dream. That day, she wasn't just a woman getting ready for a ceremony. She was a mother, and that alone said it all. Every wrinkle on her face told a chapter of sacrifice. One less pair of shoes for herself, one more plate of food for Oliver. As she applied her lipstick, her fingers trembled, but her heart danced with pride. It was Oliver's graduation. Dr. Oliver Gainan, as she had dreamed of hearing. 30 years earlier, the thought of having a son become a doctor had seemed impossibly far for someone who had barely finished high school herself. But Holly never saw obstacles as limits, only as steps to climb. She had worked as a caregiver, a cleaning lady, a Tupperware saleswoman outside school gates, anything to make sure Oliver had what he needed for his next uniform, his next book, his next chance. And every time Oliver said, "I'm going to be someone," she smiled, even if inside she was exhausted. Because to Holly, motherhood was never about recognition. It was about presence, consistency, unconditional love. The small house they lived in was humble, but it was filled with history. The bookshelf Holly had built from old fruit crates held Oliver's very first anatomy textbooks. Each underlined sentence, each folded corner was a silent reminder that dreams are born from steady, relentless effort. She knew by heart the content of every entrance exam he had taken, marked her calendars with test dates, and even memorized the names of the toughest professors. She wasn't just a mother, she was the invisible engine behind every one of his achievements. That morning, she thought back to all the times she had cooked with whatever was left in the pantry, still managing to make it look like a feast. To how she had learned to sew school uniforms to save money. And to the day she sold her engagement ring to pay for an exam fee. None of it was an exaggeration. It was survival. It was sacrifice. But above all, it was a choice. The choice to become the foundation of something greater than herself. Motherhood, for Holly, had always been an act of faith. She didn't know exactly what the future would hold, but she believed. And for her, that was enough. As she got ready, she thought about what she might say to Oliver when she saw him on stage. "I knew you could do it, maybe." Or perhaps she would just cry. After all, she had cried so much in silence that now the tears would have no reason to hide. The emotion didn't fit into words. Her heart felt larger than her chest. She remembered the first time he walked, his first fever, his first school report. Everything seemed to have led to this moment. And even if no one there knew her story, she carried with her the quiet dignity of a woman who had faced the world alone and won. The dress, simple yet elegant, was the same one she had stared at in the store window for weeks before deciding to buy it. She had never been vain, but tonight she wanted to look beautiful. She wanted Oliver to see her for who she was: his mother, his warrior, his anchor. She adjusted her earrings, fixed her hair, and for a moment hesitated. Would he call her up on stage? Would he hug her? She didn't want applause, she wanted belonging. She wanted to be seen not as a background extra in her own life, but as the protagonist she had always been. And that hurt more than she realized. She grabbed her purse, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the house with steady steps. The neighbors, who had watched her struggles for years, smiled as she walked by. "Today's the big day, Holly," they said. And she, with the serene smile of someone who had suffered enough to understand the value of every small victory, simply nodded. No one knew what was about to happen. But until that moment, she was the proud mother of a newly minted doctor. And nothing, absolutely nothing, could take that from her. At least, that's what she thought. The sting of rejection hadn't yet arrived. The truth was still on its way. In the car, on her way to the university, she clutched the invitation tightly as if that piece of gold-embossed paper were proof that it had all been worth it. That the years of work, exhaustion, and tears cried into her pillow had not been in vain. When she arrived, she saw the lights, the photographers, the well-dressed guests. But nothing seemed more valuable than what she carried in her chest: the certainty that she had given everything she could. That she had built his life, even at the cost of her own. In that moment, before any pain, before the rejection, she was simply a mother. And that was enough. The ceremony had already begun when Holly slipped in quietly. She chose to stand at the back, near the side aisle. She didn't want attention. She just wanted to watch. She saw Oliver's name projected onto the big screen, and her heart nearly burst out of her chest. Dr. Oliver Gainan, it read, in shimmering gold letters. She smiled through tear-filled eyes, feeling as though it were her own graduation. In many ways it was. All those years of sacrifice had a name, a surname, and now a title. She glanced around, looking for a better spot, but before she could move, the tone of the ceremony suddenly shifted. On stage, Oliver was called. He walked up with that particular smile he only wore when he knew people were watching. Back straight, suit immaculate, moving with the polish of someone who had learned to navigate a world that hadn't been his to begin with. Holly recognized that look instantly. It was the same one he had when he wanted to distance himself from something or someone. And in that exact moment, everything fell apart. The master of ceremonies congratulated him and asked if there was anyone special he would like to mention. And then, like an invisible dagger, Oliver replied, "I'd like to thank my mother, Amber Gainan, for her unwavering strength and support." Hollis' world crumbled in absolute silence. Amber? The wealthy woman, Richard's wife, who had stepped into Oliver's life in the last few years? The one who had offered him internships, trips, and opportunities? The same woman Holly had tolerated out of sheer respect? Her legs felt weak. She reached for the back of a chair to steady herself. Her face burned, as if each word had lit a bonfire inside her chest. That word, mother, the very core of her identity, had been ripped away right there, in front of everyone. And the worst part? No one seemed surprised. They applauded Amber as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Amber walked up onto the stage, visibly moved. She accepted a bouquet of flowers, embraced Oliver. The cameras flashed, capturing the moment from every angle. It looked rehearsed, as if she'd been preparing for this exact scene for years. And Holly, still standing in the back of the hall, felt herself shrinking smaller and smaller. It was as if everyone in that room had silently agreed to erase her story. Public rejection wasn't just painful, it was humiliating. To be erased with elegance, with smiles and applause, was more devastating than any direct insult. And Holly knew this wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate choice. Some guests who knew her seemed to recognize her face. One of them, wearing a confused expression, came up and asked, "Are you related to the graduate?" And she, unsure what else to say, replied in a faint, almost breaking voice, "I'm a family friend." That sentence spoken out of shame, self-protection, fear of making a scene burned in her throat like hot coals. A family friend? She was the one who had carried him for 9 months, cared for him through every fever, held his hand when he was afraid of the dark. It had always been her. But there, in that room, in that moment, she was no one. From the stage, Amber offered Holly a polite, mechanical wave, empty, the kind you give a distant acquaintance. Holly forced herself to smile back, but it was a broken, lopsided smile, the kind only people who have suffered deeply can recognize. She wanted to stand, to shout, to stop everything. But she stayed frozen, trapped between the dignity she had cultivated over decades and the raw pain of being erased by her own son. And the cruelest part? She knew Oliver knew she was there. For just a second, he glanced toward her and then looked away, like someone avoiding the eyes of a ghost. The words echoed inside her skull like shouts, "My mother, Amber Gainan." It didn't matter how she tried to rationalize it. It didn't matter if Oliver was confused, pressured, influenced. The naked truth was that he had denied her publicly, deliberately. And she, who had always held everything together alone, was now left to carry this pain alone as well. Sitting in that audience, surrounded by strangers, she relived every night she had dreamed of this day. Every detail she had imagined. But never, not even in her worst nightmares, had she pictured being ignored like this. And in that silent space where only those who have suffered deeply can hear, something inside her began to stir. The motherhood Holly had so carefully nurtured for decades was no longer a gentle, steady flame, it was a dormant volcano, beginning to tremble. What it screamed for wasn't revenge. It was truth. The truth she carried in her chest like an invisible medal. This wasn't about applause. It wasn't about public recognition. It was about identity. About dignity. She didn't yet know what she was going to do. But one thing was already certain: she would not be forgotten. Not like this. And whatever came next would beat the very least unforgettable. Holly couldn't remember the last time she had felt something so devastating. The kind of pain that freezes you, but at the same time triggers a blaring alarm inside. React. Sitting in the hard plastic chair of the auditorium, she clasped her hands tightly in her lap, trying to keep her composure. It felt like she was in a movie, watching herself being erased in real time. Every laugh, every camera flash, every oblivious glance in her direction was like a sharp blade. A family friend. The phrase repeated in her head like a cruel taunt, as if her entire history were just a disposable footnote. Oliver, the boy she had cradled through countless sleepless nights, moved from group to group, posing for photos, proudly introducing Amber. Holly noticed the curious stares aimed her way. Some looked her up and down, perhaps trying to figure out why she was there. Others simply turned away, embarrassed for her. But no one asked. No one cared. The shock came not only from the rejection itself, but from the complete erasure. It was as if she were nothing more than an accident in his story, a name without meaning in the very narrative she had built from the ground up. Even those who knew her avoided the topic, following that unspoken social rule: don't touch what hurts. But in this case, that silence felt like complicity. And Holly, who had always been strong, now felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Motherhood had always been her foundation. Everything she was, everything she had built, revolved around Oliver. And now, seeing him deny it, it was like having her very identity ripped from her hands. Her body was still there, but her soul seemed lost somewhere between the past and the present. How do you move forward after something like that? She tried to convince herself it was just a mistake, a misunderstanding, maybe a momentary lapse. But deep down, she knew the truth. Oliver knew exactly who she was. And even so, he chose not to name her. He hadn't introduced her, hadn't even glanced her way with acknowledgement, hadn't said so much as a thank you. This wasn't omission. It was rejection. And there's no emotional makeup strong enough to cover that kind of wound. Holly felt as if she were mourning. Mourning a bond she thought was unbreakable. Mourning a recognition that never came. And for someone who had given everything, that's a death while still breathing. The festive atmosphere around her seemed to mock her pain. With every new tribute, every applause, she withdrew deeper into herself. She remembered the time Oliver broke his arm and she spent 3 nights sleeping upright in a hospital chair. The time he had pneumonia and she walked miles to buy the cheapest medicine. The time she sold homemade sweets at school just to pay for his field trip. All of that was real love, tangible love. Real sacrifice. Not the kind you wrap in pretty words for a polished speech. And seeing it all replaced with an edited version of reality was unbearable. Amber, always elegant, passed by smiling like someone greeting a familiar face at a social event. No words. No solidarity. Holly didn't want emotional charity. She just wanted respect. She wanted her place in the story. But in this theater, the script had clearly been rewritten by hands that didn't know the truth. And deep down, that hurt more than anything else. Because the dignity she had fought so hard to protect was now treated as if it were nothing more than an unimportant detail. And Holly, no matter how strong she was still human. And it hurt. She thought about leaving. Walking out, leaving it all behind. But some invisible force kept her there. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe dignity. Or maybe love. The kind of love that, even wounded, still believes. Because Holly wasn't there just for herself. She was there for every mother who had ever been made invisible. For every woman who gave everything and got crumbs in return. She didn't yet know what she would do. But inside, something was already decided: this story would not end like this. She deserved more. Oliver needed to know. And the world needed to hear it. And in that silence filled with a storm of thoughts, Holly rose to her feet. She walked toward the refreshment table for juice and water, each step deliberate. She needed a moment to breathe, to steady herself. It was such a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of defiance. It was as if her very posture was saying, "I'm still here." And then, catching her reflection in the glass of a window, she saw herself clearly. Despite everything, she was still a mother. Still the woman who had faced the world armed only with love. And no one, absolutely no one, could erase that. What would happen next? She didn't know. But one thing was certain: her truth would no longer live in the shadows. The hall was at the height of its euphoria when Holly decided she could no longer stay silent. This wasn't about creating a scene, it had never been about that. But there is a line between dignity and erasure. And in that moment, that line had been crossed. She took a deep breath, smoothed her dress with both hands, and began walking toward the stage. Confused eyes followed her, whispers trailed in her wake. Each step felt like an act of resistance, because standing tall when the world tries to erase you is pure courage. And Holly, with every fiber of her being, carried that courage in her eyes. The master of ceremonies was just about to close the event when she reached the stage. She calmly asked for the microphone. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. Her voice came out steady, even if her heart trembled. "Good evening," she began. "My name is Holly Gainan. And before this ceremony ends, I need to say something that has been left out tonight." The room fell into a heavy, spreading silence. Smiles froze in place. From across the hall, Oliver stood abruptly, shock written all over his face. Amber furrowed her brow, trying to mask the tension. But Holly, in that moment, was nothing but truth. "I am Oliver's mother. The mother who raised him alone for almost 3 decades. The woman who traded her dreams for diapers, who studied by candlelight with him when the power was cut off." Her words sliced through the air like a blade, not out of rage, but with precision. "I'm not here to ruin anything. Only to remind you that behind every achievement, there is a story. And mine hasn't been told yet." A few people began whispering to each other. Others simply lowered their heads, ashamed. It was as if, all at once, Everyone could see what they had chosen to ignore before. From her purse, Holly pulled out a small, worn cardboard box. From it, she took old photographs, birthday cards, and crayon drawings Oliver had made as a child. This was his very first diploma from kindergarten. I received this piece of paper and kept it as if it were gold. A few nervous chuckles escaped the crowd, but Holly didn't falter. I was there for every step of the staircase he climbed. And even if I was never mentioned tonight, that doesn't change what's real. The word identity pulsed in every sentence. Hers. Oliver's. And maybe even theirs. Amber is a remarkable woman, and am not here to take anything from her. But I will not accept being reduced to a family friend. That erases everything I lived through, and that I will not allow. The hall was still. Even those who didn't know who Holly was could feel the weight of her words. This wasn't just a public statement, it was a restoration. A silent demand for recognition. For respect. Holly wasn't asking for applause. She was demanding truth. And when you carry truth, you don't need to shout. You just need to speak. And that's exactly what she did. Oliver, from his corner of the room, suddenly looked like a boy again, confused, lost, unsure where to put his hands. He hadn't expected this. Maybe he had never stopped to think about the impact of his choices. Shame wrapped around him like a suffocating blanket. And standing before the woman he had denied, he felt for the first time the true weight of the word forgiveness. He didn't yet know if he had the courage to ask for it. But he knew he needed to listen. To hear everything. Because ignoring her truth would be the same as denying himself. Amber tried to maintain her composure, but the tension was visible. She knew that this version of events delivered, without shouting or accusations, undermined the carefully crafted story she had lived in. And instead of interrupting, she simply stood there watching. It was like sitting through a play in which she was no longer in control. Because now, Holly was the protagonist. And her story finale was being told out loud. With dignity. With courage. With soul. The room was no longer the same. And no one there would leave unchanged. Holly handed the microphone back calmly. She didn't need to say more. What had to be said had been said. She returned to her seat without haste, head held high. Inside, her heart still burned, but alongside the burn came a strange, quiet relief. She hadn't sought revenge. She had sought to be seen. And in that instant, even if only briefly, the world saw her. What would come next was still a question mark. But what happened that night was the first step toward turning the page. Not as a victim, but as the woman who refused to be forgotten. After her revelation, the hall was drenched in an uncomfortable silence. The once lively conversations gave way to sidelong glances, tense whispers, and awkward expressions. Holly remained seated, steady, while Amber and Oliver slipped away quickly toward a side room. And it was there, into that closed space, that Holly followed them. Not with anger, but with purpose. The door shut behind her with a dry, echoing click. The air inside was thick, almost heavy. Amber stood with her arms crossed. Oliver, visibly shaken, stared at the floor. The confrontation was inevitable now. There was no more room for half-truths. You erased me, Oliver. Hollis' voice was quiet, but it cut like glass. And the worst part is that you did it with pride. Oliver opened his mouth to speak, but she raised a hand, stopping him. I was there in every moment of your life. And tonight, I wasn't even invited to stand as a supporting character. Amber stepped forward, attempting to soften the moment. Holly, it was a misunderstanding. But Holly interrupted, her tone calm, the kind of calm that comes when all the tears have already been cried. No, Amber. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was Constructiona version of reality, carefully built to fit what you both considered acceptable. But the truth isn't erased so easily. Oliver finally lifted his head, meeting his mother's eyes for the first time that night. I just wanted to make things easier. Easier for who? Holly asked, her gaze locked on his. For you? Or for this image you've built, one where there's no space for your real origins? He swallowed hard, unable to answer. She continued, her voice unshaking. Motherhood is sacrifice. I swallowed my pride, slept on hospital floors, sold my engagement ring to pay your exam fees. And in return, what did I get? The title of family friend? Each word hit like a hammer. There was no place left to hide. Amber tried again, this time with a sharper edge. Oliver deserves a dignified life. And you know you couldn't have provided that on your own. Holly gave a bitter laugh, the kind that comes from a lifetime of hearing the same insults dressed up as concern. Oh, Amber, do you really believe dignity comes from money? Because if that's true, then I am the poorest woman in the world. But if dignity comes from principles, from not abandoning someone, from holding the weight when you have nothing left, then I am a millionaire. The room went still. Even Amber seemed to feel the sting of those words. You think recognition is applause? That being a mother is about looking good in photos? Hollis' eyes moved between them both. Being a mother is about giving up pieces of yourself, about facing rejection, about rebuilding your child every time they break and still being pushed aside because I don't match the backdrop you've chosen? Oliver said nothing. He just listened, the truth dismantling his defenses one by one. Holly wasn't begging. She wasn't pleading. She was laying the truth bare, piece by piece. If I had left you in your father's hands, do you know where you'd be right now? She asked. Oliver hesitated. On the streets, she answered for him. Or worse. You know that. And still you chose to erase me. This isn't just about me, Oliver. This is about you too. About your identity. Amber lowered her gaze for the first time. She seemed to realize that Holly wasn't just the biological mother. She was the woman who had made every part of this possible without stages, without cameras. With nothing but love. Real love. Unfiltered. Oliver's voice was tight when he finally spoke. I didn't want to hurt you. Holly stepped closer, her voice steady. You didn't hurt me, Oliver. You disappointed me. And there's a big difference. Hurt fades. Disappointment needs time before it can turn into forgiveness. He remained silent. The shame in the room was almost tangible. Holly took a breath, stepped back. But you know what's still here? Hope. Because despite everything, I'm still your mother. And mothers know how to begin again. It was the first glimmer of something new, though before it could grow, the truth needed time to heal. Amber's voice came softer now, stripped of all superiority. Holly, I'm sorry. For the first time, it wasn't an act. No pretense, no defense, just a simple, human sentence. Holly nodded slowly. The truth hurts. But it frees us. And from now on, there's only room for the truther, nothing else will make sense. She turned toward the door. The confrontation hadn't been just with Oliver or Amber, it had been with the years of silence she had carried inside. And as she stepped out of that room, she no longer bore the weight of invisibility. She carried the strength of having been heard. Of having reclaimed her own story. Later that night, when the guests had all gone and the shallow sparkle of the graduation had faded into the quiet of the campus, Oliver found Holly. She was sitting on a bench in the small garden behind the university, her gaze turned upward, as if drawing strength from the stars. He approached slowly, sitting beside her without speaking for several long seconds. It felt strange for him to be there, not as the admired Dr. Oliver Gainan, but as the boy who had once feared the dark and curled up in his mother's arms. The silence between them was heavy, dense with things unsaid. And for the first time in a long time, Oliver understood that sometimes the most important conversations don't start with words. They start with simply showing up. Oliver kept his eyes fixed on the ground, his hands loosely clasped together, the weight of the evening pressing heavily on his shoulders. Holly didn't look at him right away, her gaze remained on the sky, as though she could pull some kind of calm from the distant constellations. The sounds of the campus at night were muted now, the faint hum of a streetlight, the rustle of leaves, the occasional distant laughter from lingering guests. But between them, there was only that thick, wordless quiet and uneasy stillness that seemed to stretch with every passing second. Finally, Oliver spoke, his voice low, almost hesitant. I don't even know where to start. Holly didn't answer immediately. She let the silence breathe a little longer before turning her head just enough to glance at him. Then start where it hurts the most, she said softly. He swallowed, his Adam's apple shifting nervously. I thought I was protecting myself. Protecting the image I've been trying to build. But standing up there tonight, I realized I was cutting out the very person who made all of this possible. Hollis' expression didn't soften, but there was no anger in her eyes, only a deep, tired truth. You weren't just cutting me out, Oliver. You were cutting yourself in half. Her words lingered in the cool night air, heavy but undeniable. He took a breath, shaking his head slightly. I was wrong. And I don't know how to make it right. You can't erase what happened tonight, Holly replied. But you can choose what happens next. For the first time since the ceremony, Oliver looked directly into her eyes. The confident, polished man from the stage was gone. In his place was the boy she remembered, the one who used to run to her when he scraped his knees, the one who believed she could fix anything. I don't deserve your forgiveness, he said quietly. Maybe not today, Holly answered. But forgiveness isn't something you earn in one grand gesture. It's something you build, the same way I built you, day by day, choice by choice. A faint breeze swept through the garden, stirring the leaves overhead. Oliver's voice wavered. I want to try, Mom. The word Mom hit her like a gentle but undeniable tide, flooding the space between them with something warmer than the night air. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply reached over and placed her hand over his. Then we start here, she said. And for the first time all evening, Holly felt that maybe, just maybe, this story wasn't ending after all. It was Oliver who broke the silence. I was ashamed, Mom. The words came raw, without sugarcoating, like someone ripping a bandage off an open wound. Holly didn't react right away. She simply listened. He went on, not of you. Of me. Of where I came from. Of the small house, the patched-up clothes, the lunches of rice and eggs when my classmates were talking about fancy restaurants. His voice wavered between regret and confusion. I wanted to fit into that other world. I wanted to be accepted. And to do that I had to lie to myself about who I was. Holly stayed quiet. Because sometimes, silence is the most powerful answer there is. Oliver continued, I built a version of myself that fit better at the Mitchell family dinners. And in that version, you didn't exist. He lowered his eyes, ashamed. But today, when you spoke, when you showed those pictures, something inside me broke. Because there was the truth. A truth I buried for years but has been screaming inside me ever since they called me doctor. The title now felt hollow. Almost like a farce. I spent so much time trying to be accepted by others, that I rejected the one who accepted me first. And more than that, the one who never rejected me. The confession came out slowly, but with a strange sense of relief, like he could finally breathe for real. I was so busy trying to make up for everything I didn't have that I stopped seeing everything I did have. Love, sacrifice, dignity. And now I understand those things are worth more than any diploma. Holly finally turned her face toward him. Her eyes, still glistening, didn't hold anger. They held something far harder to earn, understanding. She placed her hand over his. A simple gesture, but one that carried the weight of a tight embrace. You lost yourself, Oliver. But now you're finding your way back. He nodded, tears in his eyes. Will you forgive me? The question came out almost as a whisper, as if he feared the answer. Holly took a deep breath. Forgiveness is a journey. And you've just taken the first step. Those words lifted a burden from him heavier than he expected. Because true forgiveness doesn't come from speeches, it comes from action. And he knew he would have to rebuild that bridge, brick by brick. Holly took advantage of that moment of openness to speak, but without accusing. Yes, you were manipulated. But you also made choices. And it's important to acknowledge that and act. Feeling guilty isn't enough. You need to transform. Oliver wiped his eyes. I want to get back what I lost with you. Not just for my conscience, but because you deserve it. It was the first time he had spoken that way since his teenage years, without defenses, without masks, with nothing but his heart exposed. And there, on that simple park bench, the reconstruction began. The most remarkable thing was that even hurt Holly could still see a future. Because a mother's love, even when wounded, has this unexplainable ability to see beyond the pain. If you really want to start over, Oliver, then begin by acknowledging, "Not for me. For yourself." Because only those who face their own story head-on can truly change. He nodded, feeling those words would echo inside him for a long time. The man who stood there, our doctor, a once distant son, was now simply a man wanting to reclaim what he had left behind. And that alone was already a great beginning. When they stood up from that bench, Holly and Oliver hadn't resolved everything. But they had taken the most important step, the step of truth. That night didn't end with a movie scene hug or polished lines of instant healing. It ended with an honest look and a silent agreement nothing would be erased again. Their story would be told as it was, full of mistakes, pain, but also redemption. And most importantly, dignity. Because when truth comes to light, everything changes. And this time, it was for real. A few days after the graduation, once tempers had cooled a little, Oliver asked to talk to Holly again. This time, he wanted to open up about something he had been carrying in his chest since his teenage years, something that had always confused him, but now made perfect sense. They were in the kitchen of Holly's small apartment, sipping freshly brewed coffee like in the old days. The wooden table bore marks of time, but also of countless stories. And it was there, between one spoonful of sugar and another, that Oliver dropped the bombshell: "Mom, Harrison used me." Holly, who had long suspected it, simply looked at her son, waiting for him to go on. For years, he would show up from time to time. Never with affection, never with consistency. But always with a way to fill my head with ideas. He'd tell me I deserved more, that you were hiding me, that you were selfish for not letting him be involved. Holly took a deep breath. She knew all too well the poison wrapped in Harrison's charm. And I, lonely, hungry for a man's attention, for a father's presence, I started to believe him. Oliver stirred his coffee with more force than necessary. But he only came to me when he needed something. It was never about me. He went on to explain how, in his adolescence, Harrison had convinced him to ask Amber and Richard for money under the pretense of paying for courses, buying books, improving his life. But the truth is that he took it all. He made me look ungrateful. And I let him. Now Oliver was crying openly. I thought I was being smart, you know? That it was a shortcut to better my situation. But it was just manipulation. Holly listened with her heart in pieces, not because of the money, but because of her son's innocence. Because of the way Harrison had hijacked, for so long, Oliver's sense of self. He badmouthed you. Said you were limited, that you kept me trapped in a small world. That you just wanted to keep me dependent. Oliver's voice shook. And I believed him, Mom. Because he told me what I wanted to hear. He didn't love me. He just wanted to hurt you. He used who I was to wound you. Holly closed her eyes for a moment. Hearing it hurt deeply, but there was also a strange sense of relief. The truth, however cruel, was freeing. And in that moment, they were freeing themselves together. When I met Amber, he started pushing even harder. Told me to get close to her, to strike up conversations, to make myself indispensable. And that's what I did. And she, lonely for a son, took me in emotionally. And Harrison used that to get favors, money, influence. And I became an accomplice without even realizing it. Oliver's voice was heavy, thick with guilt. Holly knew that inside the man in front of her, the suit-wearing adult, there was still a boy struggling to understand where manipulation ended and personal choice began. And that takes time. She placed her hand over his on the table. You were just a boy, Oliver. And boys need a role model. When they don't have one, any shadow can look like a lighthouse. Tears streamed down his face again. I just wanted a father, Mom. That's all. She answered calmly, you had one. It just didn't come in the package you expected. It came in the form of tough love, sleepless nights, hard choices. I understand your pain. But now you know. And now you can do differently. The silence that followed was more powerful than 1,000 apologies. It was a moment of deep reconnection. That conversation was a turning point. For the first time, Oliver saw Harrison for what he truly was, a man who confused power with affection. And Holly, once again, proved that dignity doesn't vanish, even when the world tries to tear everything around you apart. She didn't rejoice in Oliver's mistakes, but she allowed herself to breathe, knowing the truth was finally being seen. Now, more than ever, it was time to look forward. But first they would need to revisit the past. Not to suffer, but to understand. Because only then could they truly break free. That night, when Oliver said goodbye with a hug that lasted longer than any they'd shared before, Holly understood was coming back. Not as the boy he once was, but as a man willing to rewrite his own story. And perhaps, for the first time, to do it alongside her. Reconciliation was a path, yes. But before that came overcoming. Overcoming everything: rejection, lies, illusions. And in that small apartment, between coffee and truth, that path had just begun. Days after the conversation with Oliver about Harrison, Holly felt it was time to share a part of her story she had always kept locked away. Not out of fear, but out of protection. She knew that certain truths have their own timing, and now, with her son more open, more human, she saw the opportunity to unlock an emotional chest she had kept sealed for decades. She invited Oliver over for lunch: rice, beans, a simple salad, and a slow-cooked pot roast. A mother's kind of meal. Halfway through, she dropped it casually. "Do you remember Thomas?" Oliver frowned. The name wasn't completely foreign, but the memory was vague. "Thomas was a true love I had after your father," Holly said with a shy, almost timid smile. "He showed up when I needed it most. And he treated you as if you were his own. Remember that blue tricycle you got when you were 6? He bought it for you." Oliver's eyes widened. "Really?" She nodded. "He couldn't adopt you officially, but he loved you. And for 2 years we were a family. Small but happy." She told him how they met at a night course for customer service, while she was trying to improve her resume. He was a widower, calm, the kind of man who spoke with his eyes. And unlike Harrison, Thomas never tried to control or erase any one added to their lives. But like everything in lifetime, showed no mercy. Thomas became ill suddenly, diagnosed far too late with cancer. 6 months later, he was gone. And I had to piece myself back together again. Holly spoke with serenity, but the longing in her voice was unmistakable. Oliver listened intently. For the first time, he realized his mother had her own emotional journey, her own loves, her own losses. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell me?" And she answered with the kind of maturity only time can bring: "Because you were too young. And later, I just wanted to spare you from more pain. You'd already been through enough with your father." Holly looked at her son. "But I'm telling you now because you need to know. You need to understand where your strength comes from. You're not just made of what you've lost, you're also made of what you had, even if it was for a short time. Thomas taught me that true love doesn't need noisy, it needs presence." She remembered the little things: notes on the fridge, coffee left on the table, bedtime stories he told Oliver. "He gave me a breath of air during a time when I was only breathing for you." It was with Thomas that she relearned how to dream. But it was also through his passing that she understood the weight of rejection and the resilience needed to overcome it. Because losing someone who truly saw you after being ignored for so long leaves marks that never fade entirely. Oliver discreetly wiped away a tear. "I wish I remembered more about him." Holly smiled. "You might not remember clearly, but a lot of the good in you comes from that time. The respectful way you treat people, the way you listen, even that habit you have of arranging the silverware just right." She laughed, a soft, nostalgic laugh that seemed to come from deep in her memory. "You had a hard childhood, but you had love. And now, with everything that's coming to light, it's time to look at your story with more kindness. With more truth." Oliver simply nodded. Each new piece of information was completing the puzzle of his identity. She then took out an old box and pulled a few photographs from it. One showed Thomas and Oliver together in a park, both smiling. "I saved this for when you were ready." It was more than just a picture, it was a piece of the past being returned. "Your story, Oliver, is made of many pieces. Some you knew. Others, like this, were hidden. But now everything's coming to the surface. And only then can you truly move forward in peace. With yourself. With me. With the past." He held the photograph as if it were a treasure because to him, it was. In that moment, Oliver understood something essential. Holly wasn't just the warrior mother he thought he knew. She was also a woman with dreams, with losses, with loves, and with her own pain. And that made her even greater in his eyes. Her motherhood had been built on many silences. But now, those silences were finding their voice. And what remained was not bitterness but recognition, gratitude, forgiveness. Their story, with all its imperfections, now felt more complete, more real, and ready to face whatever came next. The past has a way of showing up sometimes through memories, sometimes in the form of people who insist on appearing when you least expect them. For Holly, it came in flesh and bone. A week after reconciling with Oliver, Harrison showed up at the Mitchells' mansion. Yes, Amber and Richard's home. Like someone who knows exactly where to press to reopen a wound, he arrived disguised as concern. Introducing himself to the doorman as Oliver's father, he managed to get inside. He wasn't there out of longing or remorse. He had a single purpose: to manipulate, again. Amber, who had already begun rethinking her impressions about everything, received him cautiously. "What do you want, Harrison?" He smiled, as he always did, that smile that tried to assert control through charm. "I came to talk. So much has been happening, I thought we should clear the air." But it wasn't about clearing anything, it was emotional blackmail. He began dropping insinuations, suggesting that Holly was planting stories, that she wanted to take advantage of the family, that she was preparing some emotional scam. And it was at that exact moment that Holly walked in. She had come to visit Oliver, and there she was face to face with her past. She stepped into the room, and for a moment, no one spoke. Harrison turned toward her with that same old condescending tone. "Holly, good to see you. I think we need to talk." But she was no longer the same woman who used to swallow her words to keep the peace. She was a woman who had found her voice again. "You have no power here anymore, Harrison. And if you came to play the same old game, know this: the audience has changed." Amber stood in silence, absorbing every word with a mixture of surprise and admiration. This confrontation was long overdue. "You spent your life running from responsibility. You left me pregnant, disappeared, and now you want to pretend to be a father?" Holly stepped closer, still composed. "The only thing you've ever done for Oliver is mess with his head." Harrison, still trying to stay in control, countered, "I always wanted to be part of his life. You're the one who pushed me away." That's when Oliver entered the room. Silence. The son, now a grown man, carried in his eyes a certainty Holly had never seen before. "No, Dad. You never wanted to be part of my life. You just wanted to use my story for your own benefit." Oliver's presence turned the tide instantly. Harrison tried to soften the blow. "Son, I made mistakes, but—" Oliver cut him off. "You're not my father. Biologically, maybe. But a father is someone who's there. Someone who doesn't disappear and then come back only when they need something." The air was heavy, but there was no fear anymore. "No doubt." Holly firmly added, "You can leave now. And take your lies with you." Amber, still stunned, simply nodded. For the first time, she could see clearly who was who. The truth was standing its ground with calm, with clarity, with strength. Harrison got up without saying much. He realized the game was over. The version of Oliver who was once needy and easy to manipulate was gone. And Holly was a fortress. "You'll regret treating me like this," was all he muttered before leaving like a stray dog who no longer had a home. But no one in that room felt fear. The cycle had ended right there. The last tie to a toxic past had been cut not with hatred, but with the kind of firmness only truth can bring. When the door closed, Oliver turned to his mother. "You were incredible, Mom." She smiled, tired but whole. "I just did what needed to be done. Sometimes, to keep your dignity, you have to face the ones who hurt you. Look fear in the eye and say it's over." Amber, still shaken, offered tea. And they all sat at the table, as if they needed to digest more than just words they had years, even decades, to digest. But now they were on the same side. For the first time without lies, without masks. Holly knew this didn't erase the pain of the past. But it did close a bitter chapter. A cycle of rejection and erasure she had carried alone for far too long. Now, Oliver didn't just see her, defended her. He recognized her. And that, as simple as it might sound, was monumental. Because sometimes, the real victory doesn't come in the form of applause, it comes in the form of peace. And in that quiet living room, peace was all they felt. In the days following the confrontation with Harrison, something shifted between Holly and Oliver. It was as if the air around them had grown lighter, as if words flowed more naturally. The invisible weight that had once kept them apart was gone, and the sharp edges of resentment no longer cut into their gestures. The pain was still there, of course, but it no longer ruled their conversations. They were finally seeing each other as two flawed human beings, bound together by something rare, the genuine desire to rebuild. And it was on an ordinary Sunday morning, over pancakes and freshly brewed coffee, that Oliver took his first concrete step. "Mom, I want to come home for a while." Holly, surprised, stopped stirring the batter. "What do you mean?" He smiled. "Not with all my stuff. But to come here more often. To help, to listen, to learn. Actually, to relearn." And she understood instantly. This wasn't about moving, it was about belonging. Oliver wanted to reconnect with his roots. To do that, he needed to return to the source, the modest home, the familiar smells of childhood, the woman who had held everything together when no one else would. It was the beginning of healing. Their reconciliation didn't come wrapped in rehearsed speeches, it came in actions. Oliver began to show up more. He went grocery shopping with Holly, cooked meals by her side, listened to her stories like a man uncovering hidden treasures. And Holly, in turn, didn't push or demand. She let him come closer at his own pace, in his own way. It was like watching a plant bloom after a long drought. Every gesture was progress. And between conversations and laughter, the space once occupied by pain was slowly being filled with something new. They didn't forget the past, but they were no longer prisoners of it. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of old papers, Oliver found a crumpled note written in a child's handwriting. "I love you, Mommy. When I grow up, I'm going to buy you a big house." He read it silently, his eyes watering, before handing it to her. "I still want to do that, you know?" Holly laughed softly. "I already have a big house inside you." It was the kind of phrase you carry forever, because it holds not just affection, but truth. They didn't need a mansion, they needed each other. And now they had that. Oliver began speaking about his mother naturally to colleagues, to Amber, to his college friends. There was no longer any shame, only pride. And whenever he mentioned Holly, he used the same phrase, "the strongest woman I know." For her, that was the truest form of recognition. It wasn't about photographs or social media posts, it was about being seen with the eyes of the soul. And now, finally, he saw her not as the invisible woman of his past, but as the very foundation of his existence. That was redemption. Holly, in turn, began to dream again. Small dreams, taking a bus trip to the countryside, signing up for an arts and crafts course, maybe even writing a book. Oliver encouraged her. He told her he wanted to see her dreams blossom now. And slowly, she began taking steps toward them. After all, she had spent so much of her life caring for others, it was time to learn to care for herself. This new emotional space wasn't just important, it was necessary. Because every woman, after a lifetime of motherhood, needs to rediscover her own identity. Bit by bit, They began planning a new routine together: regular visits, Sunday dinners, even a trip to the place where Holly had grown up. It was more than tourism, it was a homecoming. Oliver wanted to understand his own story, the context, the reasons behind it all. And Holly, with the patience only she possessed, began telling him everything, hiding nothing, speaking with truth, with humor, with tenderness. It was a real exchange, an honest one. Reconciliation, after all, is when pain becomes a bridge, not a wall. One evening, sitting on the porch, Oliver took his mother's hand and said, "You're not just my mom. You're my origin, my foundation, my truth." Holly smiled, saying nothing, because in that moment, everything that needed to be said was already there. In the presence, in the look, and most of all, in the certainty that their love had endured. It had survived rejection, time, lies. And now it was reborn. Stronger, clearer, finally whole. Amber could no longer ignore the impact Holly had made. After seeing her strength, her truth, and her story, she made a decision: she wanted Holly by her side. At a simple lunch, far from the spotlight, Amber made the offer. "I want you to lead a project at the foundation. Women need to hear from someone who's lived it." Holly hesitated, but accepted with one condition: the project would carry her name. Not out of vanity, but out of justice. The woman who had once been erased would now become a reference. From pain came purpose. From rejection, leadership. At the Foundation's event, before a packed audience, Oliver stepped up to the stage and did the unthinkable. "My greatest achievement has a name, Holly Gainan. My mother. My foundation. My truth." He called Holly to the stage and honored her with tears and an embrace that was nothing like the one years ago when she was introduced as a family friend. This time, she was applauded on her feet as a symbol of strength and resilience. She didn't need to give a speech, her eyes said it all. Holly was finally recognized. Not as a supporting role, but as the protagonist of her own story. How many truths have you swallowed just to keep the peace? How many pieces of yourself have you hidden to fit into spaces that were never meant for you? Holly's story is about that, about invisible mothers, silent loves, and scars no one sees but that shape who we are. But it's also about something greater: the power to rise, even after being erased. Have you been recognizing yourself in your own journey? Have you honored the one who lifted you when everything seemed to crumble? Or maybe you're the one who's always lifting others with no recognition, no break, no applause. If that's the case, let me tell you something: your story matters. Your effort matters. Your pain has a name. And your love carries weight. The world is full of voices telling us who we should be. But true strength lies in looking in the mirror and seeing every mark as a medal. It lies in forgiving, in rebuilding, in refusing to accept less than you deserve. Like Holly, maybe you too are waiting for a moment of redemption. And who knows, maybe it's closer than you think. So tell me, what will you do with your truth from now on? Will you keep hiding it, or will you turn it into a path for others? Will you keep shrinking yourself, or will you let yourself bloom? The answer is in your hands. Because every pain can become a bridge. And every story, when told with courage, can change lives. If this story touched your heart in any way, if it reminded you of someone, or inspired you to revisit your own journey, then don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and leave your comment below. Tell us who is the person who taught you the most about real love. And of course, if you want to keep hearing stories like this, stories that move, provoke, and transform, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There's still so much truth to be told. And maybe the next story will be yours.